It's a simple question, really. Do you need to spend a lot of money on a fancy pencil to become a professional artist or to get to some particular level? The answer is obviously no, and it's no for one simple reason, and that is that as artists, we adapt to our tools, and the most important tool is the one that you know how to use well. This is a fundamental truth that I found over years and years of teaching and practicing and chasing after the best, fanciest new pencil. However, there are a lot of more expensive options out there for pencils, and what I want to do in this video is talk about what you get when you spend a little bit more for a pencil. Hey there, welcome again to the Drawing Codex. My name's Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for 20 years, as I said, chasing after the perfect pencil for all that time, and again, failing in my goal to have some pencil that actually helped me draw. And we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination on this channel, embracing the challenge of drawing and mastering the craft of line and color illustration, which you often use pencils for quite a bit. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is drawing for my particular style, which is where we use pencils more for getting a line that we then take into Photoshop or use in some stage of the process. A lot of these things might be different if you are sort of angling yourself more as a fine artist, where the finished result that you're going to frame literally as an original and present might be really important. In that case, the sort of density and the specific darkness that you can get with the pencil might be really important. In my case, what I'm interested in is the specific feel and the flow and the way that this kind of responds to, me being able to sketch and put down lines and just kind of think and act through the pencil. Now, if you want to learn more about how to build your own line and color style, you can check out my free quick start guide. It goes over my basic ideas and thoughts for how to get up and started quickly in Photoshop with a simple, reliable process. This is the foundation that I've used since that very first book that I drew, The 7 Pirates, where I was taking scan drawings and coloring them in Photoshop, to the books that I created 100% digitally. And again, most of the work that I do now, it's just lines and simple color, but I found that to be very effective. So you can check that out if you want. It goes over my basic advice and talks about how to go from thumbnail to the finished product. Check it out. The link will be in the description. So I'm primarily a digital first artist these days. Most of the comics that I've done recently and a lot of the concept art work that I do is mostly digital. And as you can see, there is a variety of Wacom tablets, Cintiqs, drawing screens in my studio now. But I first started drawing professionally with the sort of pencil and paper and scanning method. I never really got into drawing with inks, so what I would do is create really finished clean lines with a pencil, and I'd scan that, take it into Photoshop, and use that to create my finished lines. And I found that was actually a really good way to work, and I did quite a few projects recently that way as well. So I always feel like there's utility to a pencil from a production standpoint, and certainly you might find other artists who are much more keen on that idea than me. Most of the time I just go with what is kind of like easiest and most effective for the particular job at hand. But I still use a pencil all day, every day for sketching because I think it helps me think. Now, there's quite a few different pencils that you can buy. Obviously, there's a huge array of different things that you can purchase and play around with. The ones that I've kind of settled on and used are just the ones that I'm going to talk about, which is the Blackwing pencils and the sort of Tombow Mono 100 pencils, and I also have a Mitsubishi sort of high uni pencil, which is also quite a good quality pencil to use. And I'm going to sort of talk about and roughly compare that to your sort of standard pencil that you would find, at an art store. I'm not going to talk about, these pencils versus the cheapest pencils you can buy, because I think as an artist, it's well worth, stepping up from your sort of 10-cent pencil that you buy in a giant pack of 20 at a dollar store and going for, something that is at least an artist grade pencil. If you really are strapped for cash, I think the best option is to go with a mechanical pencil, because that way everything seems to work out quite cheaply and you can get quite a nice sort of hand feel. You can adjust that exactly to how you want, and then the leads tend to be a lot cheaper than buying them with sort of wood strapped around them. Anyway, let's jump over to the drawing table and we'll sketch around with these and talk about them and what you might get when you step up from a sort of basic artist grade pencil to some of these more sort of fancy pencils that cost a little bit more. All right, here we are at the drawing table. Now, as I said, I drew the entire Seven Pirates book that I created in the mid 2000s, or probably this was published in 2007. As an example, I drew this entire thing using a traditional process where we would use a mix of creating roughs at a small scale, and then I would scan those in and I would potentially clean them out, adjust them, and print them out much larger, and then do the kind of finished line work over the top. In most of those cases, what I used was a mechanical pencil, either a 0.5 or 0.35 actually, because in the end I found that I needed quite a small line size to make that function. The main thing that I found was that in the cases where we're scanning the pencils and we're using the lines and adjusting them in Photoshop in a line and color style, the most important thing with the pencil was kind of how it made you feel, more or less. It was the feel of it in the hand and how sort of dark it was, how easy it was to erase. And it wasn't really a matter of necessarily making it very dark on the page, because we could adjust that, but it was mostly just a matter of getting a nice sort of physical thing to hold and making sure that the lead was kind of a good mix of darkness, but not to the point where it would smudge. Because when we're scanning things, one of the real problems that you run into is that if you have any kind of smudging or anything where, again, you get a whole bunch of sort of gunk and graphite on your hand and you kind of start smudging it on the page, it gets really messy and it becomes quite challenging to then clean that up in Photoshop. So often what I'm optimizing for in that case is making sure that the pencil isn't too dark, because that would tend to kind of put more graphite down. And if I sort of, put my hand over it at all, it would get really, really, really messy really quickly. And that became a challenge to clean up. So I tended to focus on actually using much lighter pencils and then darkening them up in Photoshop. Now that's just a bit of an aside, because most of the time now when I'm sketching around, what I use is just whatever pencil I feel like. And I've actually gotten quite happy with the Blackwing matte pencils, because they leave quite a dark line, which works quite well for this setup, where I want you to be able to see the lines that I'm putting down, and I want to be able to get a nice sort of clean dark line, so that when I'm drawing whatever I'm drawing for these demos, that you can see it. Now the thing there is to just highlight the first point that I made, which is that you will adapt to the tools, and in many cases the ones that you need are the ones that offer functionality. In both of those cases, I didn't just pick the pencil that I like to use the most. I was using the one that gave me the most utility for the task that I was dealing with at hand. Overall, what I think is that you will tend to adapt to any of the pencils that you use, and as long as they are suitable for the purpose that you're using them for, you'll kind of be fine. And some can be more expensive, some can be cheaper. It doesn't really matter that much. But first, let's look at what you tend to get when you go from using a sort of simple pencil to something that is a little bit more of a high-grade pencil. Again, something like a Tombow Mono or any of these others. The primary thing you're going to get is, I would say, probably a better mix of the lead. and a slightly smoother feel of the lead, and you tend to find that often the actual wood that's used is a little bit smoother and a little bit nicer to sharpen. Now these things seem like they're not that important, but I found that overall these things can make a little bit of a difference if you're looking for consistency. So one of the things that tends to happen with a cheaper pencil, and again, I think this is a Staedtler Tradition 100 pencil. I have no idea where this came from because I don't tend to buy cheaper pencils, and if this is probably still an artist grade pencil. What you tend to find is often there can be in cheaper pencils sort of essentially inconsistencies with the lead. So you'll be drawing something, and what happens is that as it hits a particular sort of different grade or some sort of gunk in the lead, what happens is you sort of get a weird feeling, and it's not as smooth as it could be. So as you're drawing, there'll often be a little bit of a scratch, or the feel of the pencil and the way that it's putting down lead will become inconsistent. This seems like a small thing, and it is, but that is often one of the main things that you're getting when you buy a more expensive pencil. It's just going to be a little bit more reliable. The wood is going to be a little bit more fancy. You can't really see it here in this video, but again, the wood is a little bit rougher, and it tends to, sort of not be as consistent when you sharpen it. Again, that's sort of, worth what it is, depending on how much you care about that. For me, that's not worth that much, but it is worth noting. If we look at something like a Tombow Mono 100, what you're going to get is just an excellent pencil with a really good mix of pressure versus darkness. So typically, again, you're going to have all of these pencils be rated with B, HB, 2B, 3B, 4B, etc. And then you go into the H's if it's harder. That's stuff that most people understand in terms of when they're picking a pencil, but not all pencils are equal. And what you tend to find is that some pencils will actually be quite dark, even though they're not that soft, if that makes sense. So basically, you can still get quite a dark line with a Tombow Mono, but you don't have to maybe use quite as soft of a lead, if that makes sense. It's a very, very small point, but often what it means is that if you choose a sort of cheaper pencil, yes, you can get one that's maybe sort of dark, but the lead is maybe going to be quite soft, and that comes with its own challenges, i.e. having to sharpen the pencil frequently, and again, it's going to tend to put down a lot more graphite, which is going to be, a problem for smudging, etc. Slightly better pencils will just tend to have a better mix of those things, and it'll also be something where the pencil's going to be nice and reliable, and it's always going to give you a really nice line and a mix of, again, as I said, pressure versus darkness versus smoothness. The Mitsubishi High Uni pencils are, again, a similar sort of, quality grade pencil. I'm not an expert in this, so I'm just giving you my basic advice based on my experience using them. But again, you're going to find a similar sort of quality with this. It's going to have a good smoothness to it. It's going to have a good way that it sort of grips the paper. The pencil wood is quite nice and smooth, and generally that sort of thing is going to work pretty well. Now, that's probably the best way to describe the difference between a sort of a cheap artist grade pencil and a, more expensive, better brand artist pencil. Now, the thing with these Blackwing pencils is that they don't really follow the B, 2B, 2H, etc. grade. There's just a set number of them. And there's a range of different pencils that you can get, which again, sort of go up in expense. And this is by no means the best of them, or, the ones that I've sort of picked. These are just ones that I've played around with. The thing with the Blackwing pencils that does make them a little bit more fancy is just that they have a really, really nice lead in them. The lead is kind of very, very optimized, and they just kind of it's a little bit sort of magic the way it works. There's 3 of them here, The matte one, the black one, is kind of darker. I forget which one of these is kind of softer or lighter. I don't use these as much, but they are very good to use for just sort of writing and taking notes. This is one of the things that often happens. I'll often have people come around to my house and they'll kind of see me sort of sketching, or I'll have a sketchbook with a bunch of these sort of, lying on the kitchen table or something, and people will say, "Oh, that's a fancy pencil." And I'm like, "Yeah, it is. How about I get you one?" And, so I'll sort of get a box, because I have a few sort of boxes of these things. And I'll just sort of give them one, or let them try one. And in that case, again, it's often the case that people will say, "Oh yeah, sure, whatever, I'm sure it looks fancy, but," and I'm like, no, you got to try this, because it is a lot better to write with than a normal pencil. And they kind of say, yeah, okay. And I sort of end up giving them one. And as soon as they put pencil to paper, it's like, ooh, that's fancy. That's a little bit better. And that's the best way that I can explain what you get when you're buying something like the Blackwing. And again, this may or may not sort of be what you're after in terms of, the specific darkness of it or whatever. But the little tagline it has is half the pressure, twice the speed. And that is just a really good way of explaining it. What you tend to find with the Blackwing pencils, which is why I've sort of tended to use them more and more, is just that the sort of touch that you need to get a line is really, really good. And that just means you can be very light with it, which is something that I personally prefer. I like drawing with a light touch and being able to get a dark line that sort of works and puts down lead. And that's typically what will happen. It means that you can be very relaxed with it. I can, just graze the paper and it'll put down a nice line. And particularly what I found is that, again, I really like what this brings out of my lines and the way that I think and the way that this kind of works. And that really is a major, major part of this, and something that's important. But it's not exactly what you always want, and that's what I want to talk about next. So the point there is that depending on what softness you use of lead and the amount of pressure you have to put down on the pencil against the page or the surface to get a result, it will actually change the type of line that you create. And this is where you can find that some pencils will bring things out of you, and lines and styles that other pencils just won't. One of the things that I find that using a matte black Blackwing is that, it does tend to make me become very kind of soft and flowy, because I can do that. I don't need to, worry about pressing hard to get a dark line, and the lines tend to flow. But that's not what people always want from a stylistic standpoint. If you have a pencil that, maybe is a HB or a H, maybe a 2H, what you're going to find is, again, if I just do the same kind of flowiness, it's going to be very light. You can see that if I'm using the same sort of softness of touch that I use with the Blackwing with one of these harder pencils, I'm not getting anything. So what that tends to do is it'll make us press harder to get a nice line. And as you press harder, it sort of changes the way that you put down lines. This is one of the things that I often talk about that is very important for style. It's important for you to find the pencil that really fits you, because often that will bring out the type of lines that you want to create. So if you want to create more angular lines and create sort of shapes with your art that are more angular, and this might be, again, where we're drawing the exact same subject, drawing some sort of orc thing, which is, again, just what I tend to do when my brain is off and I'm, not thinking very clearly, just sort of in flow. Right, it's going to be a lot easier with this type of pencil to create these more sort of angular shapes, because the way that this responds to the page just kind of tends to work better from that standpoint. Again, we could analyze the physics of it and, explain why. It should be pretty obvious that just what we're often looking for is a particular hardness of line that is affecting the paper at a certain sort of degree, i.e. we're not digging too hard, we're not trashing the paper, we're not causing major problems by, again, sort of digging in or sort of ruining it, because you'll never be able to erase that. And as you kind of find that sort of perfect pressure that you're able to kind of create a line for, if it's a very flowy line and a very low amount of pressure, you're naturally going to be able to kind of move in a very flowy way. If it's something where we're dealing with more angular lines, what you're going to tend to do is appropriate a line style and a style in general that is a little bit more chicken scratchy, right? It involves, more straight lines, more angularity, or at least that's what I find happens when I modify what I do based on the lines. And that's something that, again, I think is really, really important to consider. Now, you can look at some of the sort of softer versions of the Blackwing, and again, they do a great job of reducing that sort of darkness. But again, they're still going to be sort of like a lot smoother, and they're going to not need that kind of pressure. And that's what's so good about them, right? Again, half the pressure, twice the speed. That's what's so nice about using them. But you may find that that just doesn't work for the style of art that you want to create, especially if you're going for more sort of angular shapes. What you're going to tend to find is if you start putting down the pressure, you're going to start creating really, really dark lines, which might be not what you want. So ultimately, as I said, the key points here are that you need to figure out which pencil is right for you. Some can be expensive, some can be not as expensive. It does seem to be that to get that kind of really smooth but dark line, these Blackwings do an excellent, excellent job. There's probably a lot more pencils that you could engage in if you are after more of that sort of chicken scratch look, because it just seems that that's just an easier thing to create from a lead point of view. But again, the point is for you to find one that works for you and fits the kind of style that you're after. And a lot of this is very personal. It is about the sort of aggression or the simplicity that you like to draw with. You might be someone who, again, likes to kind of really get that sort of motion in there, likes to have that kind of pressure and engagement with the paper, or you might be someone who likes to let it flow. You might be wanting to draw, as I said, a little bit more with your kind of whole body and just kind of, again, be more of your sort of traditional charcoal pencil drawing style. There's no right or wrong here. It's really about what you want. The other important thing here is a major tenet of what I like to get across on the Drawing Codex, and that is you will adapt to whatever tools you use, and you'll be able to extract from them their full potential as you build your confidence with them. And it's really your knowledge of the tool that is going to make you be able to perform at a professional level, not the tool itself. Obviously, the better you get at sort of looking at a pencil and adapting to it and quickly figuring out what it does well or not well. And one of the things that early on would really trip me up is I would be moving between these types of pencils potentially, or I'd be seeing someone else draw with like an 8B pencil and say, oh, that looks like fun. I want to really do that. I want to, like let it flow. But then I'd get an 8B pencil and I'd find that it just didn't really, it was a big change, and it took me a huge amount of time to figure out how to hold that pencil, how to get the most out of it, how to get those flowy lines, how soft to press in the beginning. And to a certain degree, that can change your entire approach to art, like whether you need to do, multiple steps and use light boxes or scan them in and blow them up to get your kind of finished process happening, or whether you can just sort of sketch lightly for your first pass and then do your second pass over that. Sometimes these things are just not possible if you're using the wrong tool that doesn't really work with that process. Ultimately, though, what you're after is a tool that both fits your style and one that you know. And what you'll find is, even though you can look at someone else using some other fancy tool or fancy thing, if you're able to utilize your tool well, you'll be able to get a lot out of it, and you'll be able to create what is the most important thing: the art and the story and the idea behind what you're creating. Just remember that, again, the tools are what we use to get us there, but no one really cares what pencil or thing you use to create the art. They care about the story and the emotional impact it has on. Anyway, that's all I've got for this one. Hopefully this was interesting. Let me know if you've got any other questions about pencils or drawing tools. Be more than happy to cover similar issues in the future. Catch you around. Happy drawing.